The history of Africa in most textbooks is a lie. For decades, we have been taught to associate greatness with places like Greece, Rome, and Egypt alone. But did you know that amazing African empires existed even before Egypt came to be? Yes. Kingdoms so advanced in their dealings that they needed no telescope to map the stars. Civilizations so ancient that they found ways to trade across oceans without external assistance. Sadly, no one talks about them anymore. Who are these empires lost to time? Why are they so mysterious? What happened to them? We'll find out together in this new episode of Secret Origins. Welcome. Have you ever thought about it? What if the greatest civilizations in African history weren't lost by accident, but erased on purpose? It's old news that when you try to describe ancient superiority, the first civilization that comes to mind is that of the Greeks, or Romans, or Egypt. But beyond the Nile, tucked under centuries of silence, is Africa. And Africa birthed empires so advanced that they rivaled the more popular neighbors. These kingdoms built pyramids taller than Giza. They mapped invisible stars without telescopes. Even better, they knew how to trade across oceans before Columbus was born. So, why don't we know their names? That's where the jaw-dropping theory came to light. The theory that says the story of Africa was rewritten by those who colonized it. What the colonial masters couldn't conquer, they buried. And these forgotten African empires are part of what they buried. For centuries, Africa was labeled the Dark Continent. Not because it lacked light, no. It's because its light was hidden. But when you think about it, how was an entire continent shoved under the carpet? It all started with a dangerous myth, one promoted by colonial explorers and European historians. This myth rang across countries, saying that Africa had no written history, no monumental architecture, and no advanced science. Can you believe that? But to combat this myth, archaeological evidence tells a different story. In Zimbabwe, there are stone cities that defy engineering logic. How can the colonial masters explain this? There are also reports of the Malian astronomers predicting stellar movements as far back as the 13th century. It gets more interesting. In Ethiopia, rock-hewn churches were carved from a single stone. All these feats were achieved at frequencies that alter average human standards. These weren't tribal anomalies, they were empires. Empires with systems, structures, and sciences that don't fit the linear timeline we've been told. What if this misinformation is why they were forgotten? This is why we have set out to reveal the truth. Are you ready to meet the powerful African civilizations that history erased? Let's dive in. The first on our list of forgotten African empires is the Kingdom of Kush. When people think of pyramids, they think of Egypt. But do you know that Egypt wasn't the only pyramid-building civilization on the Nile? Yes, Kush was a close rival. Welcome to Kush, an ancient African kingdom that flourished for over 1,000 years. At first, this empire had its capital in Napata. Later, it was changed to Meroe, which is said to be deep in modern-day Sudan. For the icing on the cake, the Kushites weren't just Egypt's neighbors. They were once its conquerors. Hard to believe, right? Let's surprise you further. In the 8th century BCE, a paper-tearing event occurred. Kushite kings invaded Egypt, established the 25th dynasty, and ruled as pharaohs. With a strong hand, they revived pyramid construction and redefined Nile Valley architecture. They did not stop there. These Kushite kings also fused Egyptian symbolism with African spirituality. It was clear that they were out to overthrow Egypt's leadership. But there is a problem. While Egyptian names are etched in textbooks today, Kush is treated like a footnote or not included altogether. Why? It's because Kush complicates the narrative that Egypt was a lone beacon of civilization in the dark continent of Africa. And for colonial historians, that narrative was inconvenient. Historians argue that the Egyptians started building the pyramids. While that may be true, the Kushites didn't just imitate Egyptian pyramids. They built more of them. After the war to overthrow Egyptian pharaohs, the Kushites left a trail of pyramids in their wake. Today, over 200 pyramids still stand in Sudan, clustered in royal cemeteries like Nuri and El Kuru. These are mathematically aligned, steep-sided structures constructed with precision stonework. One look at them, and you would see that these pyramids are far from crumbled heaps. They are so sophisticated that they even contain burial chambers with detailed artwork and inscriptions. What's more, the technological edge of the Kushites didn't stop there. To further cement their name, the people of Meroe developed advanced iron smelting techniques centuries before much of Europe. They engineered complex water systems like hafirs. Imagine building massive reservoirs that allowed urban life in really dry zones, and with such limited resources back then. How did they master such skills so early? Some oral traditions credit such skill supremacy to divine instruction. Others suggest that the unique knowledge was passed down from those who came from the stars. Either way, the records that the intelligent Kushites existed were there. But somehow, it stopped getting publicity. So what happened to Kush? Eventually, they were weakened by environmental shifts and external invasions. In the 4th century CE, the empire fell to Aksum in another invasion. In the fierce war, the Kushite cities were abandoned. In the blink of an eye, the elegant stories of this thriving kingdom were lost in the sand. But the greatest disappearance of Kush wasn't physical. It was the historical wipeout. In no time, Western scholars began to dismiss Kush as an Egyptian offshoot. Colonial archaeology downplayed its innovations, and school books went a mile further by skipping it altogether. And just like that, the Kush Empire that once ruled the Nile became a mystery. If the story of Kush left you awed, get ready to meet the megacity that was built from stones. Great Zimbabwe. Tucked into the highlands of southeastern Zimbabwe, there lies the stone ruins of Great Zimbabwe. Brace yourself, this is a city that defies everything we thought we knew about ancient sub-Saharan Africa. Built between the 11th and 15th centuries, Great Zimbabwe once held over 18,000 residents. How massive is that? But not only was the population a sight to behold, their merchandise was too. The Great Zimbabwe did well to thrive as a trade capital with connections to China, Persia, and India. At its center stood a massive stone structure called the Great Enclosure. This enclosure stretched over 820 feet in circumference and nearly 36 feet high. But what truly astonished archaeologists wasn't just the scale, it was the engineering. The walls of this ancient monument were built without mortar. That is, dry stone architecture stacked up with such precision that many still stand perfectly intact. Seeing that the architecture of the Great Enclosure was so sophisticated, questions began to arise regarding its origin. Who built such an engineering marvel? For decades, colonial scholars insisted such sophistication couldn't be African, any continent but Africa. And this is where the mystery deepened. In the late 1800s, British colonists discovered something intriguing. They stumbled on the ruins of the Great Enclosure. But instead of digging deep, they immediately assumed someone else must have built them. Some argued that it was the Phoenicians. Others proposed that it was erected by Arabs or even Egyptians. It was obvious that these suggestions were keen on crediting anything and anyone but indigenous Africans. But there is a rebuttal too blatant to ignore. As opposed to the speculations, Radiocarbon dating, archaeological digs, and local oral traditions all confirm the same thing. Great Zimbabwe was built by the ancestors of the Shona people. How was this possible? For context, the Shona people are the descendants of the Karanga people of Zimbabwe. They were part of an ethnic group called Bantu, and this ethnic group hails from South Africa. It was deduced that the ancestors of the Shona people had more up their sleeve than they liked to show. For example, in such a time with limited resources, their builders mastered geometry, city planning, and long-distance trade. On site, the Zimbabweans unearthed minerals like gold, ivory, and even ceramic artifacts from across the Indian Ocean. To date, their abilities surprised their offspring. Still, textbooks for years labeled it a mystery, ignoring the clear evidence. All because Great Zimbabwe proved Africa had cities, science, and sovereignty long before colonizers arrived. And for some, that truth was too troublesome to teach. But after the ancient Shona people erected such art, they mysteriously disappeared. What happened to Great Zimbabwe? By the 15th century, the city was mysteriously abandoned. Scholars point to exhausted resources, droughts, or shifting trade routes. But other historians suggest something interesting. The growing shadow of foreign influence and invasion wiped them out. As European and Arab interests in the city deepened, local empires were destabilized. This was often done intentionally to get profits. In the centuries that followed, Great Zimbabwe was suddenly reduced to legend. But as astonishing as ancient Zimbabwe was, it's not the only African empire that history forgot. There is more. In the heart of West Africa, on the edge of the Sahara, there stood one of history's most misunderstood intellectual powerhouses, Timbuktu. This is an ancient Mali city located about 12 miles north of the Niger River. By the 14th century, Timbuktu had become the crown jewel of the Mali Empire. This city housed over 25,000 students and a library of hundreds of thousands of manuscripts, with most written in Arabic. These manuscripts were so enriched that they covered mathematics, medicine, astronomy, law, and philosophy. What's more, these documents weren't myths or folk stories. They were peer-reviewed academic works centuries ahead of their time. Some texts even reveal mathematical models that align with heliocentric theory long before Copernicus. So why don't we hear about it? The reason will amaze you. Did you know that for centuries Western academia dismissed Timbuktu as a mythical city? Despite sufficient proof that the city was real, they still found a way to underplay their significance. Imagine a popular town that is deeply advanced being regarded as non-existent. How crazy is that? That's how far they went to abolish the fact that Africa can produce good. And when the manuscripts were finally rediscovered in modern times, the worst elimination plan happened. The manuscripts were quietly archived, with many still untranslated to this day. It was almost like someone didn't want the world to know that Africa once housed its own Ivy League. But not only did the Mali Empire produce a peak city, but this African empire also saw peak progress under a remarkable leader. His name was Mansa Musa, and he was the 9th Mansa of the Mali Empire. In 1324, Mansa Musa made a pilgrimage to Mecca that stunned the known world. What many do not know is this: he didn't just travel, he rewrote the global economy. With an entourage of 60,000 people, 12,000 servants, and so much gold that its sudden influx caused a decade-long inflation crisis in Cairo, Musa was declared by modern economists as possibly the richest man in history. Such influence. His empire was so successful that it controlled vast gold mines, advanced agriculture, and expansive trade networks. These establishments were far from local. They stretched far into Europe and Asia. Despite this influence, Mansa Musa is barely mentioned in global curricula. Why? because he was black, Muslim, and richer than any European king of his time. That kind of wealth complicates the narrative. It gets more interesting. Not only did the Mali Empire produce wealth and libraries, but it also produced astronomers. A peek into the manuscripts from Timbuktu, and you will find discussions surrounding planetary orbits, lunar cycles, and celestial alignments. These discussions were not speculative arguments, but they were done with shocking precision. For example, some texts described star systems and eclipse cycles in a way that can only be verified with modern equipment. How were they able to do this? Was their technique based on traditional African stargazing? Or do they hint at lost astronomical knowledge passed down from far older civilizations? Whatever the case, they prove a disturbing point. While Europe was still struggling through the Dark Ages, Africa was already practicing astronomy. But the amazing Timbuktu is not the only wonder that the Mali Empire produced. High in the cliffs of Mali, there lives the Dogon tribe. They were an ancient people with a cosmic secret. Long before telescopes, the Dogon possessed superior astronomical knowledge, leading them to uncover the Sirius mystery. What is this Sirius mystery? This is the special understanding of the Sirius star and its companion Sirius B. They described Sirius B to bits. This is a white dwarf star, completely invisible to the naked eye. The Dogon people knew its orbit period was 50 years, its companion status to Sirius A, and its incredibly dense mass. And they accomplished this feat years before Western science could locate the star. How? French anthropologists Marcel Griaule and Germaine Dieterlen published this stunning revelation in the 1950s after years of fieldwork. The Dogon not only knew about Sirius B, but also claimed their ancestors were visited by beings called Nommo. They described the Nommo amphibious sky teachers who came from the Sirius star system. Because of this claim, arguments began to rise surrounding the origin of their sacred knowledge. Many skeptics say the Dogon may have acquired this knowledge from modern sources, but Griaule's interviews were conducted in the 1930s, well before Sirius B was publicly confirmed by Western astronomy, so either the Dogon guessed correctly, or they were taught by their ancestors, the Nommo. If you think interpreting Sirius is all the Dogon people had in their books, you would be surprised. Beyond Sirius, Dogon cosmology is shockingly sophisticated. Their traditions speak of a spinning universe, mysterious planetary orbits, and a cosmic egg called Amma's egg. This is the egg rumored to have exploded into creation. They also reference invisible forces and atoms. All these were established in their tradition, long before these concepts emerged in modern science. The Dogon people didn't stop there. They went further to encode this knowledge into symbols, ritual masks, and oral storytelling. This way, they preserved it without paper or printing presses. But here's the kicker. Dogon astronomy has no historical predecessor in known African cultures. Their star charts just appear. So where did it come from? To date, no one knows. But the Dogon think otherwise. To them, their source is clear. Their knowledge was not invented, it was inherited from the Nommo. So, who is the Nommo? The Dogon people describe them as fish-like, double-gendered beings. The tale gets crazier. They say the Nommo descended in a spinning ark, bringing agriculture, language, and cosmic wisdom. After their mission, they returned to the stars, promising to visit again. Was this story an allegory or a literal memory? If it were literal, then the Dogon weren't just skywatchers. They were messengers, and what they remembered might be what the rest of the world forgot. In the 25th dynasty, a powerful African kingdom ruled over Egypt and controlled most world's power. We are talking about ancient Nubia. From the south of Egypt, in what is now Sudan, rose one of Africa's most strategic and underestimated empires, Nubia. At its peak, Nubia ruled not only its own territory but also conquered and governed Egypt during the 25th dynasty. They exercised so much authority that they were branded as the Black Pharaohs. They were also Kushite kings, including Piye, Taharka, and Shabaka. And they didn't just adopt Egyptian traditions, they revived and redefined them. For example, Taharka's reign was marked by expansive temple building, military campaigns, and diplomatic relations with other global powers of the time. He's even referenced in the Bible as a pharaoh who opposed Assyria. And yet, he is rarely mentioned in modern education. Why is that? It's because acknowledging that Egypt's rulers were once black Africans from Nubia would overturn everything. Such knowledge roaming about reshapes everything we assumed about power, legacy, and African identity in the ancient world, and nobody wants that. As opposed to what we have been made to believe, Nubian religion was not a copy of Egypt's. Instead, it could be seen as its twin flame. For instance, they worshipped similar gods like Amun, Isis, and Osiris, but they did not worship like the Egyptians. Instead, they gave them local nuance. Their temples were aligned with astronomical markers, and the Nubians maintained a female-dominated priesthood. Queen mothers, called Kandakes, held immense political and spiritual authority. It gets more fascinating. In places like Jebel Barkal, spiritual science and architecture were merged into one. Their sacred mountain shrines were carved and aligned with the Nile's rhythms and star movements. Some inscriptions explain concepts of soul energy, rebirth, and interdimensional balance in depth. These are all ideas that sound remarkably modern. The Nubian understanding of the afterlife wasn't ordinary. It was both spiritual and systematic, like they were living years ahead of their time. So, who really influenced who? Did Egypt civilize Nubia, or did Nubia awaken Egypt? After the fall of the 25th dynasty, Nubia endured for a while, but history didn't. With time, colonial archaeologists began to downplay and ignore Nubian records, labeling them as copied. Museums started categorizing Kushite artifacts as Lower Egyptian. Before you knew it, entire dynasties were rebranded, and what could not be rebranded was erased. Even today, schoolbooks breeze past Nubia as if it were a side note, if they bother to consider it one. However, the evidence remains. With deep study, you uncover the pyramids, temples, astronomy, and priesthoods, all built by a nation that once conquered Egypt and then was silenced by time. But this is just one of the many buried empires. In northern Ethiopia, there once lived a kingdom known as the Aksum. Ruled by the ancient Aksumite Empire, the Aksum kingdom was so vast that it minted its own coins, traded with Rome, and may have held the Ark of the Covenant. Can you believe that? Aksum rose around the 1st century CE and flourished for nearly 1,000 years. During its reign, this empire maintained trade links with India, Persia, and even China. It controlled the Red Sea corridor, which was a vital economic channel. And all this was long before European powers took notice. But even above its abundant gold, the Aksum was known for something more remarkable: its spiritual prowess. Ancient Ethiopian tradition says that Aksum's rulers were direct descendants of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This statement was found in the Kebra Nagast. This is a 14th century Ethiopian manuscript that explains how the Ark of the Covenant traveled from Israel to Ethiopia through the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. According to the Kebra Nagast, the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Ethiopia and remains hidden in Aksum to this day. Yes, that Ark. Is it a myth? Maybe. But the priests guarding the Ark in Aksum still refuse to let anyone see it to this day. There is news that mainstream media tries hard to hide. Long before Rome embraced Christianity, Aksum had already converted. This doesn't match what we have been taught. Under King Ezana in the 4th century CE, Aksum became one of the first officially Christian empires in the world. Not just in Africa, no, in the world. The Aksum built churches carved straight from solid rock. They wrote theology in Ge'ez, which was their native tongue. And more importantly, they preserved some of the oldest canonical Christian texts outside of Israel. But here is the thing. Aksum's brand of Christianity wasn't Roman. It was deeply African, fused with ancient Judaic traditions and local cosmology. With such a unique culture, why is this legacy so unknown? Perhaps it's because history painted Africa as a receiver of Christianity, but never a source. Too bad. Aksum turns that myth on its head. One of Aksum's greatest mysteries lies in Lalibela. This is a medieval city where 11 monolithic churches were carved downward from solid bedrock. They were sculpted from the earth with no scaffolding or modern tools. But here's the twist. Some researchers claim the churches release mysterious frequencies known to alter states of consciousness. This implies something strange. The churches were no ordinary places of worship. They held something more. But still, the textbooks say nothing. Maybe because once you admit Africa had its own sacred science, you start to wonder what else got buried. What do you think about these forgotten African empires? Tell us in the comments. And if you enjoyed this journey, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Ready for more? Click on one of the videos on your screen now to discover more lost civilizations and the secrets they left behind. Keep your minds open, and until we meet again.